Ready to inspire your team? Meet their professional development needs with anytime, anywhere access to a custom digital library from Overdrive. Drive performance, engagement, and culture with Overdrive. Learn more at company.overdrive.com/corporate-libraries. And visit Overdrive's booth at the ATD conference in May for your free gift.
Welcome to the Accidental Trainer, a podcast where you'll hear firsthand stories and tips on how to start and grow your training career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us Devin Hughes. Devin is a facilitator, speaker, and author. Hi, Devin.
Hello, how are you?
I am so good. I'm so excited to talk to you today. We had a little chat a few weeks ago, and I cannot stop thinking about this term that you threw out there, a loneliness epidemic. So I really want to pick your brain about that today. But first, let's talk about your career story. How did you land in your current role? Is there anything accidental that happened in your journey?
Absolutely. I am the accidental trainer. I would say the first half of my career, I was in the high tech and the life science industries on the commercial end, primarily sales and marketing. So I was never actually per se a trainer. I facilitated a lot of coaching conversations, did a lot of work managing big teams, but was never actually a trainer. And I got to an inflection point in my career where I was a little bit bored, a little bit stale, one that might even say a little bit burnt out. I had been doing a lot of speaking in groups and industry events, and occasionally people would come up to me and say, "Hey, you're a great speaker. How did you get so good?" And then finally I said, you know what? What if I could make a career out of that? Maybe all those random anecdotal data points are telling me something. And so some say the universe is talking to you, call it what you may. And I decided that I'm going to create a little boutique consultancy around emotional well-being, around organizational culture, around inclusion, around belonging, and have been doing it for the last 15 years.
I always think it's gratifying to hear someone's accidental trainer journey story and that there is something sort of serendipitous about where you've landed, which you alluded to, that all the paths, all the roads led you to this place that you're at now. I love that. I want to jump right in because, as I told you, I have a zillion questions. We definitely won't get to them all. You mentioned to me that we're facing a loneliness epidemic, and I have been mulling that over. I even checked if that was accurate, like at a true epidemic level, because that seems crazy. We just had a pandemic. It is global. It's not just the US. There are reports that it is a global public health threat. It's not just older adults. It's hitting all different age groups. So just really fascinated by this and what your insights are. And so I thought maybe a place to start first is just the impact. What does this mean? Especially in a workplace setting, the first things that came to mind for me is, how is this affecting employee engagement and productivity? Of course, if I'm thinking about my workforce, are they even able to engage? Are they able to do their work if they may be themselves dealing with loneliness?
I'll answer that twofold, if I may. And I think this is really, really important. Being alone is different than being lonely. So being alone is a physical state where you're physically by yourself. That's fine. That's okay. Being lonely is an emotional state where you're feeling alone or disconnected from others, even when they're right next to you. You see, you can be in a group of people at work or community or whomever, and you can feel very, very lonely. What I don't want you to think is that doesn't mean you have to artificially go out and just hang around a bunch of people and mean you're going to feel more connected. Or does that mean artificially, if they say everyone come back to the office or have a social gathering where you don't really know anyone and there's no structure, that you're going to feel more connected either? And I think it's a really, really important discernment. Now, in terms of engagement, for example, and I'll put it in context, as I was getting ready for this, I was thinking about, the operative word right now. And the word that comes up for me is crisis. I mean, we've got calamity, disease, wars. We've got everything. I mean, I was looking at some of the recent data, and I'll put it in context here quickly. The US is right around 14th to 15th in the world in happiness. The country that has the most resources is getting less and less happy. Burnouts at epic highs, disengagements at all-time highs, 75% of employees feel excluded at work. 83% of workers say that they suffer from some sort of work-related stress. You talked about loneliness. Again, the Surgeon General here in the US has talked about it, that 46% of workers right now in Gen Z say they're lonely. When I was in the UK recently, this is fascinating to me. They now have a minister of loneliness
Oh, wow.
in government, which clearly suggests how pervasive the problem is. One of the things that I noticed that's really fascinating also, have you heard of a chat bench?
Mm-mm.
There are benches in parks randomly in the UK with a sign hanging on it, literally a sign that says, please sit here and let's talk. And I'm like, is that where we are? That I need random benches in random municipal parks encouraging human beings to sit down and have a conversation? That's who we are. And I noticed as I was doing a recent talk, a participant said, why isn't there a Starbucks for hugs? And so in the context of all of that, we're better when we're together, when we feel more connected, when we feel like we belong, and when we feel like we matter. And when we do, engagement improves, productivity improves. And so this is why I'm spending so much of my time on this area and fascinated to talk more about it today.
Yeah, I am as well, because I love that you even said that phrase, better together, because I could see someone using this as justification for why we need to go back into the office all the time, because then we'll all be together. Where you can still be together while you're remote, but I think it's just more intentional. There's more of a system that needs to happen to make that connection. That is complicated. So it feels like maybe loneliness is evolving as a more complicated challenge for organizations. I think about people who are maybe in younger generations who joined the workforce during the pandemic. And so maybe they've only ever known a remote workforce, which I'm sure some people are listening to that and being like, hey, that sounds great. You've had flexibility from day one. What's wrong with that? But I could also see how that can be a huge challenge to finding a sense of belonging and community and feeling like you're a part of your organization. And isn't that what organizations need to make sure people stay and feel satisfied and want to do their work? I don't know if this is even a question. This just means, again, trying to make sense of this like impact and what it means now, when the reality is a lot of places will be in remote and hybrid and mixed, diverse workforces and workplace settings.
Yeah, so I'll say this. So there is no predicate, there's no certification, there's no coursework on how to lead in this space we're in right now. On the other end of the pandemic, uber inflation, political polarization, all this stuff. So in some ways, we look to the leadership team to necessarily have the answers. Well, this is the first time they've experienced it too. I mean, we're knee deep in the middle of this, right? And so occasionally I'll get devil's advocate. They'll come to me and they'll go, you know what, Devin, I'm not here to make friends. All this connectedness, it's just a job. And I go, okay, so it's purely transactional to you. There's no emotion behind it. I would push back and say this. We spend more time in the aggregate at work than we do with our families in the number of hours. And so if I'm going to spend 40 to 50 hours a week times 52 plus weeks, take away a couple of vacation over the next 30 or 40 years. You mean I'm willing to give up that much of my time not to feel any type of emotional connection? Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to be a party planner or a DJ or attend the ball games, but don't you kind of sort of think that if we create a space where you can feel more connected to the folks that you interact with Monday through Friday, the work might be done better. You might feel a little bit better, might have a little bit more fun. And if I put it in that context, most people go, yeah, kind of, sort of, yeah, I wouldn't mind feeling a little bit more of that. And that's the spirit of some of the work. Now, to your point, there's not one prescriptive answer. I wish it was easy. Just bring everybody back to the office. Oh, really? So you're tone deaf to what we've all gone through. Clearly, we can work remote and still be successful. So it's not an outcome thing. What I would suggest is being very intentional in what we do when we do bring them back. Because what I don't want you to do is bring them all back, sit them in a cube. There's no structure. I'm here, but there's no reason why I'm here. I could have done the same thing at home. Or even worse, everybody comes back to the office and they still don't meet in the room. They still go virtually from their own office. What are we doing?
Yeah, because sometimes that's better. That in the sense of, I was telling you before, so many workplaces I am hearing do have some type of flexible remote policy or hybrid work policy, which is great. The actual logistics of that are complicated and hard. That means it affects your daily routine. Having just joining a meeting means that it might always be a hybrid meeting because there will be some people in a physical office and some people not. And it's easier to have all remote meeting than being able to facilitate and make sure it's an inclusive meeting when you have hybrid folks, when you have some people who are on virtual and everyone else all in one room. I know I have experienced some mishaps or challenges with that type of meeting experience. And I think that's just a huge challenge for folks right now. So I know we could keep talking about like this impact, but I think maybe we can just jump into, if I'm thinking about our listeners right now in our community, whether you're identifying as a facilitator or instructional designer, or maybe you're an OD professional. So maybe your work is more along the lines of working on culture and engagement and collaboration in your organization. I want us to sort of explore what that means for those professionals right now. And you had mentioned something before that first, people just need to be comfortable to talk about loneliness. So how do we create a space that's supportive where people are feeling safe or comfortable to even admit that there may be loneliness happening in their workforce?
And that's not always easy. Talk about vulnerability, but I would say that depends on the degree of psychological safety on the team. And if there's a high degree of psychological safety, and psychological safety is akin to me to a Wi-Fi signal, you clearly know when you have it and when you don't. So if you have a very low degree of it, I imagine you're not going to come to the next team meeting and go, hey, everyone, am I the only one lonely here? Probably not going to happen. That aside, we could certainly talk about how you increase psychological safety, but it comes in degrees. And I think it's how you tie it. You know, if you work at any organization, we do care about outcome, individual and collective. And I think sometimes if you frame the conversation around that, like there's an opportunity, all of us, to be a better version of ourselves and create more cohesion. Now, I would say the antithesis that also I have found it can be really challenging to ideate or innovate when we don't gather sometimes. And if we're being honest, arbiters of this, and this is where, again, I talk about being vulnerable and psychologically safe. Can we all agree that sometimes when we're on online meetings, a lot of us are multitasking, not really that focused? And so starting to have those types of conversations and trying to figure out what does good look like going forward. And I think it's certainly individual by department and by team, but starting to facilitate conversations like, what does good look like going forward with this team, individually and collectively, to be a better version of ourselves? You know, even things like, do we have too many meetings? Can we have shorter meetings? What do the meetings look like? I would channel, and I'm not sure if everyone is as crazy as I am, Alexandria, about these home makeover shows. There used to be Chip and Joanna in Waco, Texas. Now, I don't know if you know them, but they're a couple. And they go into these dilapidated houses. And what they do is they do a makeover, right? Everything from the ceiling to the attic to the kitchen, you name it, right? It's fun. We kind of sort of need to do the same thing at work with a lot of the work streams we've had. We're still running the same offense pre-pandemic in a lot of cases. We're just doing it remotely. And I wonder why, if people are feeling so about work, is there an opportunity to rebuild what work looks like that going forward? And I think L&D, in a small way, can help facilitate some of those conversations.
Okay, so operationalizing this, how do you start to put it in place? And maybe it's a little bit aggressive or too on the nose to be like, okay, pulse check, how lonely are you? How is everyone feeling? Whether that's rolling out an anonymous survey or checking in even as a manager with each of your individual direct reports, maybe there's ways to get at that aspect, that crisis. And granted, it's even hard to pull out loneliness away from, I'm sure, all sorts of other confounding factors. Like so many things are interconnected. I know you're a psychology guy, so it gets complicated to even like measure that. But that's what I started to wonder. How are you like auditing, doing a pulse check, measuring loneliness or measuring some of these things on a regular basis so that you can try to be maybe not the overhaul, makeover, home makeover, culture makeover in the organization, but a constant check-in. So there's this maintenance aspect.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I mean, you could certainly survey. I mean, it depends on how big the team is. I would say, though, if I have a team of 10 and I have to survey you to get real truth, then we have a problem. To your point, if you're doing the whole organization, yeah. But on a team of 10 or 15, and I can't even ask you and you can't even tell me the truth, that's a whole different issue right there. Now, I'm not suggesting that, again, because sometimes this can feel a little bit creepy, like I'm getting in your personal life. I'm just suggesting that as the aggregate, can we own that being remote has significant advantages, quality of life, etc. But can we own that in some ways, at least I'm feeling as the leader of this team, that I miss you guys, right? I think serendipitous conversations, the things we used to have, the things we used to do, not even just the fun stuff, the kind of building off ideas, spending a little bit more quality time getting to know each other. Some of that connective tissue is missing, and I miss a little bit of that. And I wonder if there's a way that's organic to our team. And I don't want it to be my idea. I want it to be our idea, what we could do and figure out. And I think that's where it's really powerful. And whether it's a team of 8 or 28, what does that look like kind of going forward? What of us emotionally kind of sort of need and figure that out? As a leader right now, or as an L&D practitioner, whatever role that you're in, if you do not acknowledge some of this stuff, then one might surmise that you're tone deaf to what's going on. And I'm going to build on that. And what I mean by that is, I think that well-being absolutely needs to be a part of everything that we do, not hopeful happenstance. That if well-being is not woven into every program, every training modality, everything we do, that's a mistake. And 2 reasons. One, it's topical for where we are right now as a species, right? It's never been a time that I know that I have felt as a human being that we're just as polarized and ostracized and disenfranchised as we are from one another right now. So I think clearly you need to be relevant and contextual for where we are right now. And 2, you know that engagement improves, productivity improves, human beings are better when they feel better. And so knowing both of those data points, absolutely, I think it's imperative that you weave well-being into the conversation.
I like that because as you were talking, it started to make me amend your pulse check, your process of how you're looking for these clues. It might not be this question of, are you lonely? Though maybe if I have a good relationship with whoever it is that I'm talking to, I would be able to say that. But it could be other things like that you're recognizing signals. Like I'm noticing that you're not engaged like you usually are. You're irritable, maybe you're burnt out, or like some of these other things, again, that are connected. You were mentioning before all these statistics about productivity or engagement or burnout, that interconnected relationship with loneliness. And so those could be things that you're noticing, you're talking about with your people. And then maybe part of this remedy solution is what you're talking about, building connection and community to take that on. So I want to jump into some of that. What kind of strategies or interventions have you seen or worked with organizations to effectively combat loneliness within organizations? Is there a role that L&D or OD professionals have played in being part of that solution?
I think one that often is not talked about enough is boundaries, right? Having conversations around boundaries in terms of what that looks like. What do I mean specifically about that? To me, a boundary is a clear place where you begin and the other person ends. I kind of look at it kind of sort of like a fence in your backyard. You're the gatekeeper. You decide who you let in and who you let out. And in all relationships at work, we get to set limits. Key issue for all of us is recognizing when to set that limit. And I think as early as you can, it's really important that you set these clear limits. And I think this sets kind of the context for having conversations about this. Because right now, with this kind of always on, having to be always available, and there's some significant consequences of having poor boundaries, right? Boundaries can be physical, emotional, et cetera. So that's one. Having healthy boundaries can serve to establish one's identity. And it's a really nice way to get into this conversation about what's safe and comfortable, what we do and what we don't do amongst each other and with the team. So that would be the first thing. And I wonder how many of us listening to this have actually had boundary conversations with their bosses and coworkers, where you've clearly delineated boundaries, what's appropriate. For example, and I'm not going to ask you, Alexandria, but early in my career, I was guilty of checking emails and taking calls on vacations because I felt guilty, the obligatory. And I wonder right now, is there certain unwritten rules on your team? These are unwritten, they're right, unwritten.
That's what I was going to say, is that sometimes you're noticing, like, what does my manager do? What do my coworkers do? I'm new on the team. I notice that no one's responding to emails after 6 p.m. So I won't, or they're out of office and they're fully out of office. And I don't hear back from them until they're back in the office, like those kind of things. Versus if someone is emailing you at 10 o'clock at night, then maybe that's that unspoken signal. I need to be on call at all times of the day.
Yeah, and agreed. And I think that's an important conversation related to this lonely conversation, because again, the more heartfelt, real world conversations we can talk about what's appropriate and what's not, and what our individual needs are and what the team needs. And so if you look at a team culture, really, it's a bunch of unwritten rules and norms. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we normalize certain things that don't serve us, and maybe we don't talk about them enough. And the more that we can put sunshine on some of these, it's a really healthy conversation. Now, I tie that to loneliness in the context of, if you're an L&D practitioner, maybe kind of sort of when you have some folks in a physical space or a virtual space, maybe that's the only time maybe they get together that often with other people from other departments and teams. And maybe kind of sort of they don't really know each other. And to your point, maybe they were hired during the pandemic. Is there an opportunity for you as an L&D practitioner to build some connective tissue that's organic, so people feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves? And what would that look like? And so I have, as a facilitator myself, spent more and more time doing less talking, which we all know is a good thing, and having more people engage in some of these conversations. I would argue that we've lost the art of the conversation, and creating more of that so it feels more organic. And I just did one the other day, workshop the other day, and you end of the program, you ask, hey, what were your takeaways? What'd you get out of it, et cetera? At least 50% of the people in that room, and there was probably 50 people on a virtual workshop, said to me, you know what the best part, Devin? I got to know so many people that I didn't really know. I got to know them on a more personal level. And I kind of sort of knew it, but they kind of sort of felt it. It wasn't the actual knowledge. We can go read the book, but the connective tissue is what people got out of it. And so they were more inspired to dive more into the learning.
While you were describing that, it made me think about a activity that we did that was actually facilitated by our DEI committee. And I was paired up with someone that I know and am friends with, but learned more about that person, something that I didn't know about them, because we had done that activity together in this little mini training. I think that managers can create small moments like this on their own team. There's an icebreaker that I know my content team has done at ATD that I think is so fun, where you try to share something that the rest of the team doesn't know about you. And we often do it when we have a new team member, or we're meeting with a new person who maybe is outside the team. And it can be hard once you assume like, oh, I probably shared everything with these people. And it's like just a fun little activity. It doesn't have to take too long, where you get to share something about yourself that then, I don't know, creates these new organic conversations, because people want to know about this thing that you've shared. Maybe it's a place you went to, or an activity that you did, or a sport that you used to participate in that no one knows about, whatever that thing is.
I find that fascinating. I mean, I do a lot of DEI work. If I can see myself in your story, or we have a commonality of experiences, automatically I'm going to see that you and I are a lot more alike than I think. Whether you're a boomer and I'm a millennial or Gen Z, if we share a love of Taylor Swift and you're a Swiftie, you will watch the relationships and the conversations start to ebb and flow. Although, people go, well, that's obvious. Yeah, okay. So is eating right and exercising, but we don't do that either. So it's clearly not about the information. And I think from a facilitator standpoint, in terms of, getting back to this loneliness epidemic, let's not discount the spirit of connective tissue and creating more spaces for organic conversations to have happen. We use the language quite often, it takes a village. Yeah, it does. But the village doesn't form on itself. And structurally, sometimes from an L&D, what can we do to facilitate some of those conversations and bring people together? Now, that's why I'm so passionate about this. There's a collective hurt going on right now in the country and in the world. And I think as L&D practitioner in your own small way, you want to change the planet, you want to change the world, change someone's perception about what's possible. Change someone's perception about how connected they feel to their organization and their teams and that they're not alone and isolated. I think that's a big deal. And I think we have an opportunity to do that in some of the work that we do. And that's why I'm so passionate about this space.
I think it's all very related. If we're talking about what kind of strategies or initiatives or interventions or things that you can do, you're giving examples. You start with conversations about boundaries. You're creating these opportunities for connective tissue, as you say. And what does that mean? Is it inside trainings? Is it inside meetings? Is it places where people can just talk to each other more? Maybe it's something that's not even related to the training, where you're saying, you had given the example, you're talking less and less and making more and more time for your participants in your trainings to be able to talk with each other. That was my takeaway and interpretation of your response.
Yeah, well, the other thing is if I'm the leader of a team, right, a lot of the things that we do, we just do what we've always done. So maybe kind of sort of we mix it up a little bit. Maybe Alexandria is going to lead next week's meeting. And maybe we have an opportunity to have other people be the focal point of the certain meetings. I would just think that there's an opportunity organically to examine all the things that we do as a team and let's close the door, whether it's a virtual door or a real door, and literally say, does this work? So I'll give you an example. I just did this with a senior leadership team the other day of L&D practitioners, a big team. We're going to have a meeting on it, just like it sounds. Mm-hmm. Let's everybody pull up. These are all the meetings on our Outlook calendar. All right, everybody here, yeah, everyone's accepted them because everyone felt like you had the obligatory accept, right? Because if you didn't accept, then everyone would infer that maybe you're not a team player or whatever. I listed them all out on the whole team. Everybody sees them. Let's talk about it. What's the value add on this meeting? Why do we do this? Anybody get any benefits out of it? Is there any reason why we need to keep it? It's specifically related to loneliness because, again, having an opportunity to have a voice on a team makes me feel like I belong and I matter. The point of the story is we came out of that meeting with literally 25% fewer meetings. Do you kind of sort of think that people weren't a little bit more engaged and excited that we freed up time on their Outlook calendar to go do the work that they were hired? It wasn't about perks or parties or basketball games. A lot of people get excited and feel connected when you just let me do the work. And I don't feel the obligatory beholden to show up at the Thursday meeting at 2:00 when there's no agenda and everyone doesn't have their camera on and no one's paying attention.
I love it. It makes me go back to thinking about all these recommendations they say about giving a purpose to the meeting, because sometimes it's okay if the purpose is just to connect. Sometimes people just need to vent about something that their child did last night that made them angry. And then they share that story and then they feel better. And someone said, I'm sorry, that sucks that happened. And then you can go about your day and you feel good because you've had that connection. And it's also making me think our last episode that we had with Elaine Lynn Herring, she talked about these buckets of either you have a role to be a decision maker, to consult, or to inform. And this is just reinforcing it for me as I'm thinking about you're saying, if you're always in that bucket where you said, mix it up, maybe someone new leads the meeting. I love that example, because if you're someone who's always in that inform category, you're always just receiving information. In the context of the conversation with Elaine, it was, how are you being encouraged to speak up? And in the context of this conversation, it's, well, how are you even just feeling connected anymore to your organization? Why do you care? Like, that would make me feel really lonely. I would start to feel lonely, even though I'm required to go to this meeting. I'm just sitting there receiving information. No one wants my input. I'm not a decision maker. No one's consulting me on a decision. So I love that this conversation is happening right after, where I think there's all these different layers and ideas. Hopefully other people, our listeners, are taking away as well.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example because I want to be nuanced and I want to be very specific. The number one and the lowest cost thing that you might do in terms of combating this or attempting to combat this is just facilitate conversation. So again, if you're a manager or leader or supervisor, whatever role that you might be, in your one-on-ones again, or your team meetings, hey folks, What do you want? What do you need? What are the barriers in the way of you doing the things for yourself or taking advantage of things in the organization? Right? Engaging in those level of conversations, and routinely there's a lot of low hanging fruit. So you usually walk out of it going, "Oh wow, you mean if we stop doing that, that would be a big thing?" Yeah. Why are we still doing that?
So I'm imagining if I'm an L&D professional and I am telling my senior leader team or managers to do this, is there a recommendation, like a frequency of how often these types of conversations happen? Should it be monthly, weekly, anytime you see them? What's the sort of good rhythm that helps you have those types of conversations? That's not too much where you're just like, yep, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Yeah, so I would say this. I mean, let's assume for a second that you do one-on-ones. If you don't do one-on-ones, then that's an issue.
Okay.
And then if your one-on-ones are purely transactional, it's all work related, then one might infer you don't really care about my well-being anyways. So let's get beyond the work. So again, let's carve space in my one-on-ones with my team just to check in on them as a human being, not the work. How are you doing? Okay, let's create space to allow them to talk. Now, let's be real. If they're quiet and they don't share, okay, does that mean there's nothing else going on? Or maybe kind of sort of they don't feel comfortable talking to you, which is a whole different issue. And maybe we need to figure that piece out. Now, in terms of the frequency, again, I guess it depends on the frequency of your one-on-ones. In terms of redoing work, again, you're not going to do it every one-on-one necessarily to redo work. But I would say this, could you do it once a quarter just to check in? Hey, folks, what are we doing? What are we up to? When we talked in January, these were the things that we were going to work on and do a little bit better to help create a better environment. Let's do a quick postmortem. It's just a check-in. Like, for example, when we go on vacation and you're in the car, right, with your kids or family, occasionally you stop, don't you? You stop to get something to eat or you stop to stretch your legs. The same thing at work. You can't go through a calendar year and not check in on your folks individually and collectively. And sometimes it's just facilitating conversations. The good thing, Alexandria, you don't have to have the answers. You just have to ask the questions and you will go where the energy goes.
I told you before we started recording that I keep thinking of this as what's the system and who are all the players and what is all their role. So there's this shared responsibility. And I feel like we've talked about L&D professionals, we've talked about managers. I'm wondering if there's any other buckets to consider, like what's the individual's responsibility, if any. Sometimes I think individuals get a lot of work put on them for here's an issue and now you're going to have to take it on. These are the personal things that you're going to have to do. So I like that it hasn't been too much of a focus just on any individual. And then maybe also like leaders, people who have a lot of influence and power, decision-making power, authority to help create the right conditions, environment. Maybe it's all just some of the same, like modeling these conversations, making time and space for it. But I wanted to make sure I asked the question explicitly in case there's other ways to be thinking about some of these other players in this solution or working on combating loneliness.
Well, certainly environment matters, right? Because again, we're really, really influenced from our environment from inception, from being a child up. So again, if you were asking me some things you could do in terms of creating more connection, I mean, honestly, it starts before day one, right? Before the employee even gets hired. What do you do in terms of the onboarding process? If they're in a hybrid or remote, does that feel a little bit different? Do you make sure there's opportunities to create more connectivity? Some organizations have buddy programs. That's a big deal. All right. Do you have a buddy culture? Is there someone that you can buddy up with, new hire or not? In terms of assuming that you already have an established team, what might that look like? Occasionally, I've seen people have, again, beyond the office, maybe they have a lunch once a quarter, breakfast, bagels, walks, even meetings in the way we meet can be different. This is where I struggle so much is that we're remote or hybrid and we don't get together that often. And when we do, we just go back to the office and sit in the same meeting room that no one wanted to be in even before the pandemic. How about we go for a walking meeting if it's nice out? Cherry blossoms are in DC. We all walk. We all have legs, assuming that we're all able to. Is there any reason we can't gather there? I think even the nuances that are budget neutral, if we get creative enough, sometimes we can just change the environment and create more connective tissue. And when you build exercise or whatever, again, you don't have to exercise. That's not the point. The point of it is just to change the environment to create more organic connective tissue that allows people to be more human. And I'll give you an example. When I did my one-on-ones or even when I interviewed people, I always did my interviews via the walk if it was nice out. because I felt like it would clearly signal to other people that this is personal. The only people that we walk with in our personal lives are people we care about. And I think the little subtleties that you send to human beings really, really matter. And the way you start and what you do day to day is really, really important. Now, structurally, what do you do from a leader? If you're a manager of an L&D team of 10 or it doesn't matter, 50, are you going to change the whole organization? No, probably not. But what you can do is change the experience of the people that you do influence and lead. And I don't think you have to do it by yourself. And I think, again, having conversations like we've had today, changing up the way we meet, gather some of the routines that we do, really, really important, and acknowledging that there's opportunities here to feel more connective. What does connection actually look like and feel like on this team? And then ideate, brainstorm on what we could do as a team and what's the frequency of it. Because what we don't want to do is I don't want it to feel like compliance, because that feels forced and it feels and that's what I don't want. But if it's the collective team's ideas, it's a little different.
I've heard of the benefits of walking meetings before, and I'm always fascinated by the research. There's all sorts of benefits that happen in your brain when you're moving a little bit. Just like good for your body and cardiovascular health. There's all sorts of cool incentives why. But I love that you said the only people that we walk with are the people that we care about. So even just making that shift to show that you care about the people that you work with by taking an opportunity to find some movement with them, that is just a new way, again, for me to think about it, and another incentive to add to the layer. It's a way to show that you care. That's really beautiful.
Well, thanks. I've been more intentional right now, even in my own personal professional life. When people want to meet, I've been purposely getting out of my bubble and going physically to meet them. Because again, we could certainly meet on Zoom, which is great. And I love the technology, but physically. And so I have a walk in 2 weeks with a bunch of L&D practitioners, and we have a wellness walk. It's at 12 o'clock. Different people from L&D all over my local community are going to meet in this park. I live in San Diego. It's near the beach. The Outlook invite says wear your workout gear and wear shoes that you're comfortable walking in. And all we're going to do is walk and talk and laugh and hang out. And it's going to be what it'll be. But we're very intentional about creating a space. You opt in, you don't. Does everyone come every month? No, but that's okay. And it's amazing what you feel a part of community when you do that.
I think the beauty of this advice, too, is that it's manageable, it's doable, whether you're in person or remote. You can have conversations and facilitate more meaningful conversations in person, but you can also do that remotely. And you can have a conversation and show someone you care doing movement, even if you're in two different places. If I'm walking in one place, or I'm moving in one place, and you're in another physical location. I'm just thinking again about, not to bash our technology and a lot of the things that we have now that make that type of interaction possible, and that you can still foster connection that way.
Absolutely. I'm optimistic in this space because I think there are some things that you can do within your sphere of influence. They're budget neutral. You don't need to do anything necessarily in terms of applying more budget, just a little bit more intentionality, a little bit more effort. And to your point earlier, just every meeting that we have to do feel like just business. Can't we have a little bit of fun? Could we have something on the space maybe once a month where the team just gets together? And Alexandria, you're going to own this meeting, say, for example, in April. It's going to be April 25th. I'm picking a random day. And that's going to be our time to have a little bit of fun. Well, we're going to build on your strengths. We're going to put you in a position. You're going to create the space. So maybe you're into mindfulness. Just create space for all of us to be human. And that's what we need to do more often.
Well, I know for me, I won't be leading any meetings on April 25th because I get to go to a bachelorette party. So I'll be setting my boundaries and pass the torch over to someone else. Well, I know we could keep talking about this topic. It's so fun to learn from you. Let's put a pin in it for now and switch gears back over to you. Do you have any learning goals for this year? Are you getting out of your comfort zone in any way?
A couple things that I do. I take a course every quarter, graduate school course. I already have my master's, but I take a course. And people, why don't you get a degree? Well, I guess I could do that another degree. But I take a course every year just to continue to learn. What makes me happy is learning, learning new stuff, having great conversations. I try to read one book a month. Again, that's $12 a year. It's doable. I'm on planes a lot. I'm actually working on writing a new book. This new book is a little bit off, kind of a tangent, so to speak, in that I've been married 27 years. And I'm fascinated on the secrets to a, happy, blissful marriage. So I have been interviewing couples who've been married anywhere from 5 years to 50 plus years, trying to understand the dynamics of what creates a happy, blissful marriage. And so I'm working on that right now. And it's amazing hearing the different, depending on the era and how many years and the ebbs and flows and the dynamics and the flex and communication and the commonalities and the overlap. And more so just hearing people's stories. That's been really, really powerful so far as I continue to work on that.
Oh, that sounds exciting. We'll look forward to when that comes out. I feel like I'm still a newlywed, only a few years in, but I'm sure that there's interesting connections. There's probably things that successful long marriages do that successful long relationships do. Like if you're just building relationships or maintaining relationships with other people in your life. So I'm sure there's transferable lessons in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of the conversation we had today is pretty apropos around that, around connection and intentionality and having facilitating conversations. And it's really fascinating.
I love that. Where can folks find you and keep up with your activity?
I'm pretty active on social media. So whether it be LinkedIn or Instagram or X or Twitter, as we used to call it, you can also find me at my website, Devin, DEVIN, Hughes.com, devincehughes.com. I blog every week, a lot of social media. So yeah, that's probably the easiest way to stay in touch with me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights and ideas with us today, Devin. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I had a blast, enjoyed talking to you, and look forward to next time.
Thank you to our sponsor, Overdrive.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from the Association for Talent Development. Be sure to check the show notes for resources mentioned in today's episode. And if you found the show useful or insightful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with a colleague.